So you built your website using Wix, and while you love most things about the platform, it helped you get started. It has a very convenient dashboard where you can set up your products or CMS or CRM and manage everything about your website. You're considering maybe moving to another platform or at least seriously redesigning the front end of your website, but you don't want to say goodbye to all of the valuable backend tools and all of the data that you've built up over time. Welcome back to the Wix Wiz. I'm Eitan, and today we're going to be talking about something called Wix Headless, which could potentially allow you to decouple the front end and back end of your Wix websites while you can keep your store catalog and everything in place in terms of data management. You could build a completely new front end in a modern framework like React and just connect it back to your Wix account using something called Headless. We're going to explore where this technology is going and what it might look like in the future, and give you some tips and tricks if you'd like to consider this for your own website. So if you'd like to learn all about that and more, let's get started. Before we hop in and show how to make your Wix website headless, let's talk a little bit about what headless is in general and in the Wix context, and why you might decide to make that transition. So first of all, what is a headless CMS? That's not something that Wix has invented. It's a concept which essentially means that you have a CMS, which is a separate entity from your website or your hosting service. So essentially you're using a tool in order to act pretty much as a database for your website or your web app, and you are connecting it to whatever you're building your website on the front end in terms of APIs and whatnot. So a very popular, well-known CMS would be something like WordPress, which you might even think of as a website builder, but is actually a CMS with some website building tools. So essentially, Wix went the other direction. So Wix originally was purely a website building tool. And what they did is they decided to optionally decouple their CMS and business solutions from their editors so that they can be offered as a standalone product. So essentially what you can do is you can choose to use Wix's quite powerful business tools like Wix stores, Wix bookings, etc., along with their CMS, which is like a database, CRM for contacts, etc., all in order to power an application that you're building elsewhere. For example, you can build it using any front-end library of your choice, like React or a kind of like a meta framework like Next.js or something like that. And we'll explore some of those options in a moment. So that's what Headless is, and Headless in the context of Wix. Now, why is this especially important now? So Headless is something that you can start off as. So you can start off and create a headless project. So it'll be in Wix, but it won't really have an editor. You can't edit the site itself via Wix's tools. Another path that you can take is that you can transform an existing site into a headless site. So let's take a look over here for a second. So this is a Wix website that I have. It's mostly based off of a template. It's pretty much just a store-based website, and I've added in also some dynamic pages so we could play around with that as well. But it's a standard classic Wix website, by the way. Everything I'm showing you here is true also for Wix Studio. So I have this Wix website, and I like it, but I'm thinking that I might not want to use Wix's editor in order to create my site anymore. For various reasons. It could be because it's just not as nuanced as I want. I want to completely unleash all of the powers of web development and advanced frameworks like React. It could be I'm not so happy with the Wix website performance. I just kind of want to take it up a notch. It was great to start with, but it's not really doing it for me anymore. And I'm thinking of moving to something a little more advanced. And that said, I kind of like the fact that my store already exists in Wix. So if I go over here to my dashboard. So I have this really organized place where I can see all my orders, and I have my products catalog, and I have my CMS here with all my data. And this dashboard also has all of my contacts and all of my members and all of my analytics and data and everything. So I hope you understand the picture that I'm painting, and I imagine that a lot of you are in a very similar situation. So beyond just the challenge of migrating, your design and all the functionality of your website to a new platform, moving all of your data is sometimes even a bigger headache. And you might not even want to move your data because you might actually be happy with how everything is working behind the scenes. You just feel like you need a new face, you need a new storefront, you need a new something. And also, I'll highlight that this endeavor doesn't necessarily need to be a one-for-one replacement. It could be that you're keeping your website, but you may want to develop part of it as a standalone application and integrate that with your existing website, or you might be building an app not through Wix's app services, and you need to expose APIs. So it's not necessarily black and white, but I'm trying to paint a more classic and simple to understand scenario. And so essentially that's where we are at the moment, and that's where Headless comes into play. So essentially, potentially what we could do is we could transform our site into a headless site. And this is not, it's not a one-directional transformation. So let me just show you how it's done so you can get a little bit of an understanding and we can get our hands dirty. So if we go over here to settings and we scroll down over here, you'll notice that you have headless settings over here. Okay, and this is in every Wix website inside the settings. And if you go over here, this is essentially the portal where you can create a headless site or turn your site into a headless site. And again, it's not like you're completely dismembering, you're not beheading your website and then it's done and you can't edit your website through the editor anymore. You're kind of adding an additional head or you're allowing this head to be connected to another body. And essentially opening the potential to develop a front end for your site off of Wix, but it's not like you don't have to worry about losing everything that you have if you decide to kind of create a new client, which is how you would go ahead and create a new headless site. Okay, so that's why we would want headless in general, and this is how you do it. So here inside of these headless settings, you just go ahead and create new client, and then you can go ahead and it's called naming your OAuth app. So I would just call this, let's say, I don't know, my website. This is a setup where Wix is trying to create options for situations where you have multiple applications connecting to essentially the same headless site. So kind of what I described in the more complex scenario. If you're going down the most simple route, then essentially you're only going to need to do this once. And since what I want to do here, and I think most people are probably going to be doing, or I think the most common use case that I'm imagining for existing websites would be to create a new website. I'm going to choose here web, and I'm going to go ahead and create and continue. And once we get over here, so they ask us to choose a stack. I don't think this has any practical implication for how Wix sets up your headless project. I think this is more of like a survey and also just to give you, as they say here, to give you some code examples, but it's not going to actually change anything practical in terms of the setup. So I'm going to just choose here React because that's probably what I'm going to use. And here we get some instructions for how to do a basic setup, but we're not really at that point yet. So I just want to go ahead and click here continue. And then Wix offers here also some code samples and a JavaScript. So they're really trying to give you all the tools that you'd need in order to set this up. And as you probably are picking up already, this is a little more code intensive. It's a little more, you need a little bit more of a developer mindset when you're going into this. But I do want to talk about, before you run away, I do want to talk about why I think why I'm creating this tutorial at this point in time, and why I think headless is going to become more and more relevant, and why this developer orientation of headless should become less and less scary. So for those of you who have been watching the channel, you may have noticed that I recently released a tutorial about something called Wix Vibe. So essentially, this is a vibe coding tool for creating websites, essentially with a front end based in React and the back end based in Headless. So if you're familiar with a tool like Lovable, then it's essentially pretty much like Lovable, just instead of Supabase, it uses Headless, and it's still kind of in beta. So as it says up here, beta. So it's definitely not as robust as Lovable. I mean, Lovable is already quite an enterprise application, but this is definitely, Wix is definitely signaling that they're going in this direction. And even without this tool, which I hope to show you in a moment, we could also use other AI IDEs and coding tools in order to build the front end for our potential headless Wix website. And that's why I think that at this moment in time, it's ripe to introduce this tool also to people who are not this tool. When I say this tool, I mean Wix Headless, to people who are not necessarily developers and not necessarily coders themselves, because I think that we're getting very close to the point, if we're not at that point already, where somebody who doesn't know how to code could still potentially take advantage of Wix Headless and build themselves a new front-end website with little to no code, and maybe they might need to hire a developer at some point to do some tweaking and finalize some things, or if they get stuck, but definitely not spending, $10,000, $20,000 on hiring a developer to build a React front end, which is, depending on how complex your site is, though, those could be, price tags that you would see for something like that. So that's why I think that Headless, this is the time to learn about Headless. I'm not trying to encourage you to use Headless or anything like that. I'm just kind of trying to read the vibes, pardon the pun, and to make sure you're aware of what you could potentially do. I also think, based on my intuition and some conversations with Wix as well, that eventually you could do a few interesting things. So one would be to use the Vibe editor to create a new front end for existing websites through Headless, like basically what I'm showing you right now. That's not 100% connected at the moment. So if you create a new Vibe site, then it's only Headless. And even if you open up Headless on an existing site like I'm showing you now, you can't really use it with the Vibe editor just yet. But I imagine that's a bridge that will be, a gap that will be bridged quite soon. And also things that I hope Wix is going to introduce is hosting for headless websites. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in a moment once we get our hands dirty a little bit with the headless, because I think it's a little hard to understand theoretically. So let's go ahead and finish this setup for our headless website. And then we can go to the next step where we can actually create that new front end for our website and discuss the different options that we have there. Once we complete the setup for Headless, this is kind of what it's going to look like. So we're going to have an app here with a client ID. So this is not a secret API key or anything like that. This is something that you can use in front-end code, basically when you're setting up your new client. And again, I don't want to talk too theoretically without doing something hands-on. So that's what that is. There's also the option to set up an admin API key in order to have admin control from the backend. We'll discuss that a little bit as well. The only problem at the moment with the admin API keys is that the API keys are shared between all your websites. So once you create one API key, you can actually use that API key to gain admin permissions to various sites which is quite a dangerous situation as I see it. I think it's quite problematic, and I'm really hoping that they change that in the future. But just so you know, that's how you would do that. And you can create one by clicking over here on Manage API Key. Here we have a few more settings as well. I don't want to dive into those just yet, but I actually want to take a look here at the tools and help, because I want to discuss different options that we have for setting up this new front end to our website. So if we take a look over here, we can see that there's documentation. And if we click on that, then it's going to take us over here to documentation about how to create headless websites. And there's quite a lot going on here. But one of the interesting things that we have is a lot of tutorials and templates. So for example, over here, we can see that we have a few templates here. So you see here, get started from scratch or quick start with our Next.js templates. We can click view more templates. And I think that this is a good place to start, especially if you don't have any coding background and you're using a Wix business solution. So for example, we're using in our website, so we're using both e-commerce and we're using Headless CMS. So it might be a good idea to start from something like this. Okay. So for example, we can do two things. We could either view the repo, or we can actually just deploy this template via some of Wix's partners. So there's two options here in terms of Netlify and Vercel. And if, for example, we just choose Netlify over here, then we can choose the website that we want to connect to Netlify. So that's this website right over here. And now Wix, through their partnership, is setting up kind of the integration and is deploying the template as an application essentially on Netlify. Netlify is a hosting service essentially. And we need to connect to GitHub here. So I'm just going to pause for a second to connect to GitHub, and I'll be right back to show you the rest of the setup here on Netlify and explain the next steps. I've connected to GitHub, and here we have configuring the project. So here we have repository name. That's what it's going to be called inside of my GitHub. So I can just call this Headless, let's say ecom demo. And you'll see here that we have a new Wix client Headless ID. So this one, if I'm not mistaken, that is not the same one that I already set up before. So let me go over here and just compare those two. So here we have one that's 76E, and here we have B7A. So essentially what it's doing is it's setting up a new headless project for this connection. So potentially we could have gotten to this point without actually creating the new headless client over here. And it's possible that we might be able to switch out this client ID for our existing project by just copying and pasting this. But I don't want to break anything at this point, and it's not so critical to me, even if we do create a new client at this point. But just keep an eye on it if you are not starting from scratch with Netlify and it's important for you to keep the same applications or something. Just be aware of these facts. And I'm just going to hit over here to save and deploy. And essentially what this is going to do, it's going to clone the template repo repository into Netlify. And it's going to deploy it as a website. And I want to highlight several things about this process and Wix's choice to go with Next.js, which is a React-based framework. So one of the things that you're going to need to solve at this point, again, this might change as I explained in the past, but earlier in the video, but if you go headless, you're going to need to figure out how to host your website. So at the moment, your website is being hosted by Wix. Your domain is through Wix. All you have to do is just click publish, and Wix deals with servers and hosting and everything. But once you decide to go headless, at the moment, that essentially means you are decoupling yourself from Wix's hosting. Your data is hosted by Wix in terms of your product and your CMS and whatnot, but your actual website hosting, your front-end hosting, and back-end hosting. So if you had, let's say, back-end code or server or something like that, that is no longer going to be hosted by Wix at the moment. Again, if they do the Vibe bridge, or if they allow hosting via Wix, which is kind of the direction that they're going, so that might change in the future. But at the moment, you would have to use a service like Netlify or many, many, many others, cloud hosting services, or spin up your own server or whatnot. But essentially, you have to find a place to host your website. So that's one change. Another thing is that you don't really have a backend anymore, like you would have in Wix. So in Wix, you have a backend. So if you go over here, you might not know this if you're not really using your website from a developer perspective. But if you go over here and you turn on dev mode, and you go to backend and public. So here, essentially, you have the option to add in web modules and essentially run your own server through Wix and create business logic and stuff that you don't want to expose to the client side. Once you decide to go headless, you kind of lose access to that option. So you could technically still build that there and then expose it maybe via HTTP functions. I have a whole tutorial about that. And use Wix still as your server, but I think you might find it a little clunky eventually. So I think that's probably part of the reason that Wix decided to go with a framework like Next.js, which has a server. It's a React framework that also has server functionality built into it. So once you deploy to something like Netlify, you already have both a server and a front end that you can use, and that really covers all your bases essentially for your needs with your headless. But here, okay, I think it just finished deploying. So what we can do now is we can open up this production deploy, just like this. And here we go. So this is the template. So this is a React template in Next.js built by Wix. And you'll see that it's already connected to our store. Obviously, the design looks nothing like our website, and that's something we'll have to deal with. But if we go over here to get merch, so this is essentially a store page. And this store page is actually connected to our Wix website. So it's the same products. If we were to go to our live site, so let's go here to view site. Okay, so here you can see these are the products. And here in the template, those are the same products. There is some kind of issue with the images, which is something you'd need to figure out. And yeah, but you can see that kind of the product pricing matches up. And if I was to go to my dashboard and change one of the product names, then you'd see it change here as well. So you can already, the reason I wanted to show you this is twofold. So just to really give you a very tangible feeling of the fact that this is a front end not related to Wix that is connected still to your data from your dashboard. And also just to show you this option in terms of kind of kickstarting and both getting the deployment done rather in a streamlined way. So if you're not very technical, it might be a little harder for you to kind of set up the deployment and the server here inside of Netlify, even though these systems are built to be somewhat on the simpler side. And also you'd get kind of like a starter template with lots of code that's already connected to your store. So you'd have something to start with, and it would be an easier place to start building from. What I want to do now is I actually want to take this in a vibe coding direction and to experiment with creating a headless front end for our Wix website that we're going to build from scratch using an AI IDE and then deploy by ourselves. Okay, so not go this direction where we create a template via Wix, but actually to do some of this stuff ourselves to some extent using vibing and see how far that can get us. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. I haven't tried this yet myself. but I'm going to try it here with you together, and I think we're going to see some really cool stuff and the potential of going headless on Wix. Here I am inside of Cursor. Cursor is an AI IDE for AI assisted or vibe coding. And this is the editor that I'm most familiar with. So I'm using this one, but you can obviously use whichever one you'd like. We're starting a clean project just for this headless demo. And I just wanted to show you here first thing that I do have the Wix MCP connected. I have another tutorial all about that. It essentially provides a way for my AI chatbot built into Cursor to communicate with Wix's servers in a more efficient way and search documentation and stuff like that. But I'm also going to be allowing for adding context in terms of searching the web. I think that's going to be very important. And I'm going to be telling it to use this MCP wherever possible as well. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to give it some initial instructions in terms of how to, what we're building here and how to get it set up initially. So I'm actually going to try and use my existing site. Okay, so if we go here again to the live site, I'm just going to copy this URL right over here and open up Cursor. And what I'm going to tell it is that we are building a new front end in Next.js for our Wix website using Headless. Build the site based on this website. It will need to include, and I'm trying to give it as much information as possible to try and ensure its success. It will need to include e-commerce or Wix stores and connection to the Wix CMS using Headless SDKs. SDKs are essentially wrappers for the APIs that you need to use in order to interact with the Headless SDKs. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to give it also my client ID from my Headless project. Again, I'm doing this inside the chat because this is not a secret. Okay, this is not an API key. This is something that users will still need to authenticate themselves before they take actions on your website, even using this client ID. So it doesn't really give any special permissions. It just kind of points to a specific application or a specific website. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that over. And I'll write here again that this is my client ID. And I'll say here, use the Wix documentation and MCP in order to research, plan, and execute. Always use npm and package installation for starting the project. Don't just create config files from scratch. This is just something I'm adding in because I find that these code editors tend to try and like spin up these projects by themselves, where I prefer if it can tell me, let's say, npm, init, Next.js, something like that, as opposed to like creating all these config files from scratch and trying to do it by itself. I feel that sometimes introduces some errors. So that's why I added in that last little line. I think it's looking pretty good. I'm using Claude here. I usually switch off between Claude and Gemini 2.5, and I usually go into auto just for like small fixes and stuff like that later on. But since the setting up of the project is rather, brain power intensive, I prefer to use Claude. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and ship that over. And it's possible that I could have added some more detail and stuff to really help it along. I'm not 100% sure what's going to come out. There are a few places where I'm not sure how much it will succeed. One is if it'll be able to actually analyze my existing website via the URL and construct a website effectively based on it. I'm not sure what its capabilities are in that sense. And that's not a Wix thing. That's just in terms of Cursor. And I'm also not so sure how it will do and fare in terms of reading up on the documentation. I can see already that it's utilizing the MCP here in order to definitely learn some things. I see here that it's trying to use... Okay. Yeah, it's definitely reading some stuff. I'm hoping it's reading the right stuff because I saw some stuff there that I'm not so sure about. But let's go ahead here and we'll just run this. This is in order to install the Next.js. And again, I'm really... let's just go ahead and run through this. I'll open this in Terminal just so it's a little easier for me to run through it. Use TurboPack. I'm not sure what that is, but I'll say yes. I haven't used Next.js in a short while, so I'm not sure if it was so smart to choose that one as the framework for this. But again, the point is that I'm showing you one of a multitude of different options that you have at your disposal. Like you could totally just go in and build your own front end with vanilla JavaScript, CSS, and do that. I mean, you don't have to go with React. You don't have to go with Next.js. That's really the beauty of this whole thing. I'm just going with this because Wix's example, I mean, I know Next.js and I know React to some extent. I know that they're very robust and very good for many use cases. And since many of Wix's examples and templates are built in Next.js, I just feel like there will be the most source material to base ourselves off of, especially in an emerging technology like this. The more information that exists that you can kind of milk off of, the better. And that's kind of why I'm going here with those options here. So, okay, so we installed here all the packages. And now, essentially, Claude through Cursor is going ahead and installing what we see here, which is some of these SDK packages. So we have here Wix SDK, Wix Stores, Wix Data, Wix Ecom, and all these different things that it thinks it's going to need in order to set this up. And okay, so CD, yeah. So okay, it's tried installing it in the wrong place. Now it's trying to install it in the right place. Essentially because my Next.js project got set up here in this folder within the folder. And now it's running kind of that installation over here. So it's installing all of those packages. This might take a little time, so I'm just going to give a brief pause, and I'll hop back on once those packages are installed. We're back, and the packages have installed, and now we're setting up environment variables. So we're setting up essentially the client ID, which I gave it. So that's doing that over there. And now it's creating client configuration. This is essentially how we're going to interact with these APIs as an authenticated individual. We could take a peek here into these files and try and see kind of what it's doing, and try not to be too scared of all these squiggly red lines that we're seeing here. But you can see here, Wix, we're creating a client with all these various modules, so all these different APIs that we're probably going to need to use. And then we're creating a client using a specific OAuth strategy. I don't want to get too technical here because technically this tutorial is for people who aren't too technical. I mean, it could be for technical people as well, but I'm really trying to explore the extent to which we could create a headless website with as little coding as possible. So we configured up this this Wix client over here. And it kind of scares me a little bit that this it's set it up here outside of the main folder here for the project. So we might need to give it some instructions to fix that. I don't know here. Okay, so now it's installing some packages for icons. Sure. Essentially, the stage that we're in is it's analyzing the existing Wix site structure and design. It made some adjustments here to the header and the footer. It's going to be a little hard to judge whether this is actually based off of the site that I provided before we run npm run dev and actually see kind of what the site looks like. So that might have to wait till the end. I see it's setting up now something called a product grid, which is definitely in the right direction. Still, I can't really know if that's based on the instruction that I gave it that it's an e-commerce site or based on what it actually sees on the website that I provided. Yeah, sometimes what I do when I'm using tools like this is first I'll tell it to like build out a plan, and then once it presents a plan, I'll tell it, okay, you can execute or make some adjustments to the plan. And that would have allowed me to evaluate here if it actually understood anything from the website that I provided, because it would probably give me stuff like, color palette and general structure and stuff like that, which would be a lot easier to judge in terms of what it found and what it didn't. But now it's just basically writing the code to create the website. And let's see what else here it has in terms of its to-do list. So after it does that, it's going to implement Wix Stores integration, implement CMS integration for Content Manager. I see here it doesn't really understand, at least yet, what the CMS is used for, which in our case, it's going to be for displaying this team page. So we have a team items. This is essentially a dynamic page here with our different team members. This is a list page, and then each one of these is a dynamic page. So this is just a little test of like dynamic data and CMS here within the headless. I think those are probably the two most common scenarios. It already wants me to run npm run dev, which is a little surprising. Okay, let's try running it. Okay. Interesting. It did not manage to run npm run dev, but it still decided that it's moving forward. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so it doesn't really understand what exactly the CMS content is. So I'm going to have to give it a little more instruction surrounding that. I might even need to go into my CMS and find the name of the collection or something like that to give it really very detailed instructions. Come to think of it, yeah, how would it possibly know what my collection is called unless it used some of the APIs to get all the collections of the website, analyze that. But that's a little above its pay grade, I would say. Okay, so it's setting up a README file. I think we're getting pretty close to it telling me that we should go ahead and test the site. I see that it did create like a lot of different components here for getting kind of the CMS and stuff like that. But there's still a lot of red. Red is always a concerning thing. So let's just wait for it to finish the README here, and then we can hopefully try and launch it. But I imagine there'll be a slight debugging process here. Okay, so it's claiming to be done. I'll just give you like a recap of some of the stuff that it did. So this is like a summary. And just by the way, it did at some point realize that this context folder and also the lib folder weren't in the right place. So it kind of recreated them over here, which left us with like a little duplication here of Wix client. So we probably could just go ahead and get rid of this external source folder manually. Just go ahead and delete that. And now I'm going to try and run the dev and see if it actually works. I don't have very high hopes. But this is pretty normal that there would be like a short debugging stage, even with a project that's not related to Wix or Wix Headless. So let's go ahead and check out localhost here. And let's see what's going on here. It's loading. Okay, so there's definitely a website, and doesn't look too shabby. It looks nothing like the original project. So it did not really manage to analyze it and figure it out. There is an error over here. Failed to fetch tokens from OAuth API. Okay, so we're running into some Wix related issues, which is not like so surprising. I'm not saying it's Wix's fault. I'm just saying that the APIs have not been fully implemented correctly yet. So I'm going to copy over this error over here, and we can also see that there are no products here in the store, which is probably related to that same thing. So I'm just going to go over here and found this error on npm run dev. And let's see if it manages to figure that out. In the meantime, what we can do is we could already prep for giving it more instructions regarding the connection to the CMS. So we can go over here to our CMS and find this team collection, and then open up the collection settings. And here we have the collection ID, which is team. So I can just go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to let it know that, let's see, it's doing some stuff here. And I'm going to tell it that that is the, let's see, one second. Sorry, it's asking me to do too much. I have one track mind. I can only do one thing at a time. Okay, so it's updating. Oh, it needs to include the app ID. Okay, how do I find the app ID? One second. That's more important here than this. So let's go ahead and try and find that here in our settings. So we're going to go here to Headless Settings. And so here, oh, by the way, you can see that Netlify created the new OAuth over here. Let's see, my website settings, client ID. How do we find the app ID? I'm guessing the app ID is probably the website ID. Either it's the website ID, or it's actually just the client ID. Okay, I'm going to copy this code snippet here because I think Cursor might have gotten a little confused. So let me just do here, skip, stop. And let me say, here's example of client setup for Headless. I'll just give it that over there. Let's see if that sends it in the right direction. I mean, theoretically, with all of its, MCP and all of its connection to the web, you would hope it would be able to search and find this information. But the thing is that these SDKs that are used for Headless are not only used for Headless. They have many different purposes, like creating applications for Wix or even for development within Wix. And since there are so many use cases and so many examples, sometimes the AI can get a little confused and use the wrong example or stuff like that. So that might be what's happening over here. So it sometimes helps if you can kind of guide it along by giving it some of the fundamental code snippets and stuff like that it might need in order to get started. So I see that it is making some changes here. And let's see what's going on. Let me go back to our live site over here. And I'm just going to refresh. I do see there's another error. It's a different error. Okay, cannot generate visitor tokens. And then here also we have another fail to fetch in terms of fetch products. No products found. Please check your Wix store configuration. Okay. Let's go ahead and click skip. And I'll run that. Okay, so it's trying to run test again, which is not going to work because we already know that it's not really working here 100%. So at this point in time, since I don't know how long you want to watch me doing this, what I would do is twofold. Okay, I would continue to feed it these errors, and I would continue to feed it from the existing documentation and templates until it got it right. So that's what I'm going to try and do now a little bit and see how far I get. And I want to highlight that regardless of where we get at this point and how much you feel like you would manage to do that yourself, these things are only going to get better and easier. So even though right now at this point with Cursor, I couldn't spin up a new website, in the snap of a finger seamlessly with zero coding or zero kind of like dev approach in, a month, 2 months, 3 months, half a year, it's going to look different and it's going to only get better. So if you're watching this tutorial and you're like, oh no, this is way too hard for me, this is not something I'd manage to do, then that's fine. I understand that. But just remember that I'm making this tutorial not for right now, but I'm making it so you know that you have this option in the back of your mind so that, in 3 months, in 6 months, when these tools get a little better, you'll be the one that knows that you can do this. Okay, so that's really what this tutorial is all about. So I'm going to take a pause now, and I'm going to try and see if we can get this up and running because I want to show you what it looks like when it's working. And I'll give you a rundown of what I did to fix it up, and then we can just wrap up this tutorial. So I'll be back in a moment. So I'm back, not with a completed website, but did make some progress. And I just wanted to show you this to give you some inspiration and hope. So I do have the products here showing quite successfully. I think most of the issues that I ran into with the client ID, it wasn't actually problems with the Wix SDKs and the communication and understanding of them, but rather just some Next.js stuff in terms of how to set up environment variables and getting the client ID and stuff like that. So really nothing even related to Wix and Headless, and could be that I would have had a very different experience if I wasn't using Next.js or wasn't using Cursor or something like that. So it really could vary a lot based on the tools that you're using, or if you're coding yourself. I'm going to stop here because I realize that to get this to be a fully fledged working website will probably take a few hours, which is not terrible, but it's just a little bit more than I was planning on for this tutorial. But I do think that, as I said before, the possibility is there, and it's only going to get easier and faster. So I hope that you found this informational and helpful. Let me know what you're thinking about Headless and your website, and if you considered this or would consider this in the comments below. If you enjoyed this kind of tutorial, just don't forget to give a thumbs up. And if you want to see tutorials about Wix every week, whether it's new stuff that's coming out or even some basic beginner tutorials for how to code on your Wix website, I would recommend hitting that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.